In the heart of Yorkshire, a blacksmith's son built an empire from steel, gears, and relentless ambition. David Brown wasn't just a man who made machines, he made history, shaping fields, factories, and fortunes with a single-minded drive few could rival. Wars tested him, rivals challenged him, and the world changed around him, yet he pressed on, obsessed with perfection and control. Behind every tractor, every engine, and every factory line was a story of power, betrayal, and brilliance. But greatness comes with a price, and the line between triumph and ruin is thinner than a gear's tooth. Step inside the life of Britain's most relentless industrial king, the blacksmith who defied the empire. Yorkshire in the late 1800s was a kingdom of fire and iron. The forges roared louder than the church bells, and the men who worked them were as tough as the steel they shaped. This was the heart of Britain's Industrial Revolution, a world built by soot-covered hands and ruled by men who believed industry was destiny. In the small town of Huddersfield, one blacksmith's son would rise from that smoke to challenge an empire. His name was David Brown. David grew up surrounded by the music of hammer and anvil. His family had been metalworkers for generations, but where others saw labor, he saw art. Machines fascinated him, not for what they did, but for how they could be better. Every crooked gear was a personal insult. Every stubborn engine, a puzzle to be solved. He wasn't satisfied with mending the broken. He wanted to build perfection itself. But Britain wasn't kind to dreamers without pedigree. The industrial elite ran the show. Old families with old money, whose factories were built on the backs of men like Brown. Innovation was reserved for the universities and the gentlemen's clubs of London. Blacksmiths were expected to obey, not invent. Yet David Brown didn't believe in obedience. He believed in engineering. By the turn of the century, he had turned his small family workshop into something greater. David Brown and Sons became a rising supplier of precision gears for railways, ships, and factories. His components were tougher, sharper, and built to impossible tolerances. He didn't just make gears, he made the best gears in Britain. That reputation, however, came with enemies. Established manufacturers hated him. They saw this brash Yorkshire mechanic as an upstart meddling in their aristocratic trade. But Brown had something they didn't. An obsession that burned hotter than their forges. Through grit and defiance, he pushed his company to the forefront of industrial Britain. His gears were soon powering the very machines that symbolized British might, from naval vessels to textile mills. Yet, for all his success, Brown wanted more. Making parts wasn't enough. He wanted to build entire machines that bore his name, machines that would outlast him. By the 1930s, agriculture was beginning to shift from muscle to machine. The old world of horse-drawn plows was dying, and the future belonged to those who could mechanize it. Brown saw the opportunity early. He began experimenting with tractor transmissions, believing that the key to modern farming lay not in brute force but in precision engineering. His timing couldn't have been better, or worse. In 1936, his path crossed with an Irish inventor named Harry Ferguson. Ferguson had a radical new tractor design, smaller, lighter, and infinitely more efficient than the lumbering beasts then used on farms. What he lacked was a manufacturer brave enough to bring it to life. David Brown was that man. Together, they built the Ferguson-Brown Type A tractor, a sleek little machine that promised to change agriculture forever. It was innovative, practical, and years ahead of its time. For a brief moment, the partnership looked unstoppable, but behind the smiles and handshakes, there was friction. Ferguson was the visionary, but Brown was footing the bills, and when Henry Ford came knocking, offering Ferguson a deal to mass-produce his tractors in America, the partnership collapsed overnight. Ferguson took his patents and the glory across the Atlantic. Brown was left behind with nothing but unpaid debts and the bitter taste of betrayal. The break was more than business. It was personal. Brown had risked his fortune and reputation to back Ferguson's dream, only to be cut out the moment success seemed certain. To the world, Ferguson became the genius behind the modern tractor. To Brown, he was a thief who had stolen his life's work. That betrayal lit a fire that would define the rest of his career. David Brown didn't just recover, he retaliated. he founded his own tractor company, built entirely around one mission: to destroy Ferguson and outbuild Ford. His new machines were stronger, cheaper, and proudly stamped with his own name. The Yorkshire engineer who once made gears for others was now building engines for himself. In the shadow of war, his factory became a symbol of defiance, a testament to one man's refusal to bow to betrayal or empire. The blacksmith's son had risen to challenge the titans of industry, and for a while, he was winning. But every act of rebellion has its price, and David Brown was about to learn how high that price could be. War, wealth, and the tractor revolution. By the 1940s, David Brown had transformed his modest gear workshop into a full-fledged factory, one that would come to define British engineering. When the Second World War erupted, his machines did not retreat. They became essential instruments of national survival. Tanks, warships, and aircraft all carried components stamped with his name. Brown was not a soldier, yet in the industrial war effort, he was a general commanding a battlefield of steel and machinery. His precision, innovation, and relentless drive were weapons in their own right. Government contracts poured in, swelling the Huddersfield plant's production lines. Factories ran around the clock, illuminated by the dim glow of blackout lamps. Day and night, workers churned out engines, gearboxes, and transmissions that would sustain Britain's armed forces. Reliability became synonymous with the David Brown name. It was stamped on everything from bomber transmissions to naval gearboxes. Every whir, every grind, every rotation echoed his foresight, skill, and engineering genius. Yet wartime success alone did not satisfy him. Brown understood what many bureaucrats overlooked: wars end, and when they do, factories must adapt or perish. While other manufacturers rested comfortably on military contracts, he looked beyond the battlefield. Europe's scarred farmlands would demand rebuilding, and those fields would need tractors to survive and thrive. The tractor had haunted him for years. Betrayal by Harry Ferguson had cost him dearly, but Brown transformed resentment into motivation. If Ferguson could dominate the American market, Brown would conquer Britain. Stronger, more resilient, and bearing his own name alone. This was no longer simply business, it was personal, a mission driven by pride, ambition, and revenge. In 1947, the first David Brown VIF AK-1 tractor rolled off the production line. Simple, powerful, and painted in chocolate brown and cream, it embodied post-war resilience. Farmers embraced it immediately. It plowed longer, endured tougher terrain, and required less maintenance than the American imports that crowded the market. For a brief moment, David Brown was not merely an engineer. He was a national hero, a symbol of recovery and ingenuity. Timing was crucial. Britain needed tractors more than tanks. After years of rationing, agriculture had to be rebuilt. Brown's machines were more than tools. They were instruments of national recovery. Exports soon extended across Europe, into the Commonwealth, and eventually to North America. A Yorkshire manufacturer had become a global brand. The same machines that once sustained soldiers now fed them. Tools of destruction had been transformed into tools of renewal. Yet beneath this polished success, ambition began to fester. Brown's appetite for perfection became obsession. He sought total control over design, production, marketing, and even the exact paint shade. Employees recalled brilliance one day and terrifying tirades the next. The blacksmith's son had become a king, and kings tolerated no dissent, nor did they accept delay or mediocrity. Rivals threatened his ascent. Ferguson, now backed by Ford in America, mass-produced tractors faster and cheaper than Brown could. Across the Atlantic, factories churned machines with industrial precision. Operating at scales Brown's craft-focused methods could never match. His tractors were superior, but superiority alone did not guarantee victory in business. Refusing to yield, Brown escalated operations. He expanded his product line, built new factories, and invested heavily in research and development. Hundreds of workers were hired. Dealerships opened across continents, and marketing framed his tractors as symbols of British pride. For a time, it worked. David Brown became more than a company, It was a statement of ingenuity, determination, and national pride. But cracks appeared. Rapid expansion strained finances. Perfectionism collided with the brutal realities of global trade. Worst of all, Ferguson returned to Britain, armed with American capital and political influence. A rivalry that had begun in friendship threatened to erupt into full-scale corporate warfare. A battle fought not with steel, but with contracts, patents, and strategy. Brown had survived industrial revolutions and world wars. Now, he faced a different kind of battle, one in which cunning, calculation, and diplomacy would matter as much as strength. Wealth forged in war would be tested in peace. The age of war had made him rich. The age of peace would determine if he could keep it, and whether his tractors would endure as symbols of Britain's resilience or merely become memories of ambition that had once burned too brightly. The power struggle with Ferguson. By the early 1950s, the tractor market had become a battlefield in its own right, and David Brown had a new adversary, Harry Ferguson. Once a friend, then a rival across the Atlantic, Ferguson was now back in Britain, armed with American capital and industrial might. What had begun as a professional rivalry had transformed into a personal vendetta, a collision of pride, ambition, and business acumen. Brown had survived bombs, rationing, and industrial revolutions. Now he faced a foe who could challenge him without firing a single bullet. Ferguson's factories churned out tractors faster, cheaper, and in numbers that made Brown's handcrafted machines seem almost quaint. Across the Atlantic, the American backing meant access to capital, marketing muscle, and political influence. Ferguson was not just selling tractors, he was shaping an empire. Brown, by contrast, insisted on craftsmanship, precision, and quality, refusing to compromise the very standards that had built his reputation. But in business, better didn't always mean victorious. Tension simmered long before it boiled over. Dealers, distributors, and farmers found themselves caught between two giants. Brown's tractors were reliable, robust, and distinctly British, but Ferguson's were faster, cheaper, and backed by a network that could outmaneuver any independent manufacturer. Meetings that once focused on innovation now revolved around contracts, patents, and pricing strategies. Each side sought to control the market, to dominate exports, and to secure a foothold that the other could not challenge. Brown, for all his brilliance, was stubborn. His factories expanded, his research intensified, and his sales network grew. Yet Ferguson's presence in Britain became a constant thorn. Brown could see the menace in every shipment arriving from overseas, in every deal negotiated by Ferguson's representatives. The war of machines had shifted from steel and gears to ink and signatures, from factories to boardrooms. The personal stakes were just as high. Brown had not forgotten Ferguson's past betrayal, nor the loss of his chance to dominate tractor production in America. Every meeting, every negotiation carried the weight of history. Employees whispered about the tension between the two men, describing Brown as fierce and unyielding, Ferguson as cunning and relentless. Their feud became legend, a drama unfolding in workshops, showrooms, and export offices alike. Innovation became a weapon. Brown pushed his engineers to design tractors that could outperform Ferguson's in durability, efficiency, and adaptability. Every gear, lever, and engine component was scrutinized. Meanwhile, Ferguson leveraged his connections, influencing dealers and governments to favor his machines. Each advance by one side prompted a counterattack by the other, a perpetual cycle of invention and competition. Despite the pressure, Brown's resolve hardened. He refused to retreat. He had built his empire from scratch, survived wars, and reinvented British agriculture. Ferguson's challenge was formidable, but Brown knew that vision, persistence, and national pride were as powerful as any machine. He poured money into advertising, emphasizing craftsmanship, reliability, and the unique British identity of his tractors. Farmers were reminded that a David Brown machine was more than a tractor. It was a symbol of resilience and endurance. The rivalry extended beyond business strategy into reputation. Media stories, trade journals, and even casual conversations became arenas where Brown and Ferguson competed for perception. Each public victory, each glowing review, was leveraged to undercut the other. Their feud shaped the narrative of post-war British industry, illustrating that ambition, ingenuity, and tenacity could be as fiercely contested as any battlefield. By the mid-1950s, it was clear that this struggle would define the next era of British tractor manufacturing. Brown had survived bombs, betrayal, and industrial upheaval, but Ferguson's return had raised the stakes. No longer was it simply about machines, it was about influence, control, and legacy. Every decision, every factory expansion, and every new model became a move in a high-stakes game. The war had ended. The tractors were meant to rebuild fields, feed nations, and restore livelihoods. Yet, for Brown and Ferguson, the real conflict was not in the soil, but in power. A struggle of minds, strategy, and sheer will. And in this contest, there could be no compromise, only victory or defeat. The age of tractors had become an age of titans. 2 men, 2 visions, and 1 battlefield. The future of British agriculture, the playboy engineer, and the cars that killed him. David Brown was no stranger to risk. Wars had tested him, rivals had challenged him, and industry had demanded more than most men could give. Yet, in the 1960s, a new passion consumed him. Cars. Not tractors, not engines for tanks, but luxury sports cars, fast, sleek, and unapologetically British. It was an obsession fueled as much by ego as by engineering genius, a desire to leave a mark beyond farmland and factories. Brown's acquisition of Aston Martin in 1947 had seemed prudent at the time, a calculated expansion of influence. But by the 1960s, it had become personal. He wasn't merely a businessman, he was a playboy engineer, cruising the streets in custom models, attending races, and flaunting wealth that only decades of war, industry, and tenacity could have earned. His cars were extensions of himself, elegant, powerful, and occasionally dangerously unpredictable. The vehicles he championed were extraordinary machines. The DB4, DB5, and DB6 were masterpieces of engineering and design. They were symbols of sophistication, precision, and British craftsmanship. Brown demanded perfection, down to the last stitch of leather and the exact pitch of the engine note. Yet, for all their beauty and power, there was a shadow behind them. The same obsession that had driven him to success now flirted with recklessness. Speed became a temptation. Brown, ever the test pilot of his own creations, would push cars to their limits. Engineers watched nervously as he roared down country lanes, performing maneuvers no sane driver would attempt. He reveled in the control, in the feeling of absolute command over machine and road. Yet with every acceleration, he flirted with mortality. His life had been a ledger of calculated risks. Now, some were unmeasured, personal, and deadly. Outside the factory, Brown's lifestyle mirrored his driving. Glamorous parties, high society events, and encounters with celebrities became routine. He was an icon, a man whose reputation combined engineering brilliance with charismatic excess. To the world, he was a vision of post-war prosperity, an English gentleman who had conquered industry and now conquered leisure. But underneath the tailored suits and champagne, there was a tension. The more extraordinary his life became, the more fragile it was. Tragedy, when it came, was both inevitable and abrupt. Brown's fascination with speed and machinery extended to his personal vehicles. Even as safety features advanced, his insistence on testing the extremes of performance left him vulnerable. The very machines that had showcased his genius, his cars, would become instruments of fate. The roar of engines and the thrill of velocity were seductive, but the margin for error was microscopic. On a fateful day, a machine of his own making exacted its price. The details were grim yet symbolic. David Brown, the engineer who had survived bombs, corporate wars, and industrial revolutions, fell victim to the very craft that had brought him fame. It was a reminder that genius often walks hand in hand with danger, and that obsession, no matter how productive, carries an inevitable shadow. Yet his death did not diminish his legacy. The tractors continued to plow fields, the engines continued to power machines, and the cars, even those that killed him, became enduring symbols of innovation. Brown had lived as he built, boldly, unapologetically, and at full throttle. His life was a testament to the power of vision, ambition, and relentless drive, but also a cautionary tale of the thin line between mastery and recklessness. To the public, he remained the playboy engineer, a figure of charisma and ingenuity, immortalized in stories, photographs, and the very machines he had created. Yet behind the myth lay the reality of a man who pushed every boundary, who challenged both industry and himself, and who understood that greatness always came with cost. In the end, David Brown's story was not just about tractors, gears, or sports cars. It was about a life lived at maximum output, a man who refused to compromise, and the price exacted when brilliance and risk collide. The engines he designed continued to hum, the cars he built continued to race, and the legend of the playboy engineer endured, reminding the world that genius, speed, and ambition often share the same road, and that road can be perilously short. The workers' revolt and the Yorkshire collapse. By the mid-1960s, David Brown's empire was showing cracks. For decades, he had been the undisputed king of Huddersfield's factories, a master of precision, ambition, and intimidation. But as the post-war boom waned and global competition intensified, the kingdom he had built on steel and gears began to tremble. And it would not be the Americans, the factories, or even the government that dealt the first serious blow. It would be his own people. The workforce, once loyal and disciplined, had begun to chafe under the weight of Brown's obsession with perfection. Production quotas were relentless. Mistakes, however small, were met with public reprimands or fiery tirades. Employees whispered of a man brilliant but tyrannical, whose moods could turn a cheerful workshop into a theater of fear. The blacksmith's son, now a king, had grown distant from those who labored beneath him, believing that loyalty could be demanded rather than earned. By 1965, tensions had boiled over. Low wages, long hours, and increasingly unsafe conditions collided with an economic downturn, creating a powder keg. The first sparks were subtle, tools missing, machines deliberately slowed, small acts of defiance. Brown, consumed by expansion, perfection, and international ventures, failed to notice. He assumed his workers' murmurs were trivial, beneath the notice of a man accustomed to commanding armies of steel and engineers. The revolt began in earnest one autumn morning. Workers at the main Huddersfield plant walked off the lines. Their anger crystallized into collective action. Strikes spread like wildfire to satellite factories, the roar of dissent echoing through the industrial valleys of Yorkshire. For the first time, Brown faced a force beyond calculation, a rebellion not against engines or tractors, but against himself. The man who had shaped machines could not shape loyalty. The government intervened, not out of altruism, but because the collapse of Brown's factories threatened national supply chains. Yet, even ministers and mediators found it impossible to contain the fury. Workers demanded safety reforms, higher wages, and an end to Brown's micromanagement. Negotiations, when they occurred, were tense and brief. Brown's brilliance was unquestioned, but his temperament was volatile. He could not, or would not, compromise. Outside the factory gates, the streets of Huddersfield became a battleground of protest and authority. Pickets formed lines like medieval armies, chanting slogans that cut deeper than any blade. Fair pay, safety first, down with the tyrant. Brown's industrial empire, once the pride of Yorkshire, trembled on the edge of collapse. The man who had built machines to withstand bombs now faced destruction from those he had relied upon to operate them. Production stalled, orders were delayed, contracts threatened, and Brown's global reputation faltered. Dealers in Europe and North America grew anxious. Investors whispered that the Yorkshire powerhouse might crumble, that perfectionism and authoritarian management were insufficient shields against social upheaval. Brown had engineered machines that could endure fire, water, and steel, yet he had overlooked the most unpredictable engine of all, human will. Ultimately, compromise came not from concession but from exhaustion. Weeks of strikes, protests, and near chaos forced Brown to yield partially. Wages were increased, working hours slightly reduced, and safety measures implemented. But the damage had been done. The factories, once symbols of post-war triumph and engineering mastery, bore scars not of war, but of revolt. The king's authority, unchallenged for decades, had been publicly questioned, and for the first time, David Brown recognized that his empire was mortal. The Yorkshire collapse was as much psychological as industrial. Brown had survived global conflict, rivalries with Ferguson, and post-war market turbulence. Yet here, in the heart of his own domain, he faced defeat not from competitors but from those who had powered his success. Machines continued to hum, tractors continued to plow, and Aston Martins roared on distant roads. But the man who had once seemed invincible now understood a bitter truth. Steel could endure, engines could endure, even money could endure. But tyranny, unchecked, always ignites rebellion. By 1966, the revolt had ended, but its lesson lingered like smoke in the Yorkshire valleys. David Brown's empire had survived, but the cracks were visible, deep, and unhealable by mere ambition. The factories remained, but their king had been humbled. The age of unquestioned authority had ended. Human will, it seemed, was the one machine even David Brown could not master. The great sell-off and the American betrayal. By the late 1960s, David Brown's empire was no longer the indomitable fortress it had once been. The Huddersfield factories still churned out tractors and gearboxes, but the golden age of post-war triumph had ended. The strikes, protests, and unrest of the previous decade had left invisible cracks across the empire, cracks that expanded with every missed shipment, every delayed contract, and every boardroom quarrel. Brown, the once feared king of Yorkshire industry, now faced enemies far more cunning than disgruntled workers, financiers, rivals, and the lure of American money. Ferguson, ever the specter in Brown's mind, had returned to haunt him not with tractors alone, but with a strategy of patient dominance. Backed by deep pockets and political influence, Ferguson had expanded into global markets that Brown had once considered his own. The man who had betrayed him years ago was now positioned to strike where it hurt the most, the financial heart of the empire. Brown's factories were efficient, his machines superior, but in a world increasingly dictated by cash flow and shareholder confidence, superior craftsmanship was not enough. The first signs of compromise appeared quietly. Investors, once loyal to the Huddersfield genius, began whispering about the risks of expansion, the volatility of Brown's temperament, and the mounting labor unrest. Orders were delayed, contracts threatened. Brown, obsessed with perfection and unwilling to relinquish control, began seeking quick injections of capital. It was a dangerous compromise, one that would set the stage for the betrayal to come. In 1969, the first negotiations with American financiers began. Brown had long distrusted transatlantic business dealings, but the lure of immediate liquidity, the promise of expansion, and the persistent pressure of global markets eroded his resolve. He sold significant shares of his company to an American consortium, a move intended to secure the future of his empire. On paper, it was strategic. In reality, it was the beginning of the end. The betrayal was subtle, almost bureaucratic at first. Decisions that had once flowed through Brown's hands were now filtered through American executives. Marketing strategies, product designs, and even pricing were influenced by foreign interests. Ferguson, ever opportunistic, had allies within the consortium. Slowly, the David Brown name was diluted, its authority undermined by the very system meant to protect it. The tractors remained excellent, but the soul of the company was eroding. By the early 1970s, the consequences were undeniable. Factories that had once symbolized resilience became theaters of tension. Longtime employees found their influence diminished. American managers imposed unfamiliar methods, emphasizing profit margins over engineering excellence. Brown, whose life had been defined by control and precision, watched as decades of authority slipped away. His empire, forged in war and ambition, was being quietly dismantled by accountants and strategists. Ferguson's presence was the cruelest irony. The man who had betrayed Brown years earlier now seemed omnipresent, leveraging transatlantic connections and American capital to outmaneuver his old rival. The betrayal was not violent, nor dramatic in the traditional sense, but it was total. Every contract, every sale, every expansion Brown had meticulously built was now shadowed by the influence of the American financiers he had reluctantly welcomed. The Huddersfield King, once untouchable, became a figurehead. Decisions were still made, machines still rolled off the line, and David Brown remained stamped on gearboxes and tractors. Yet the reality was stark. His empire was no longer his. Wealth, influence, and authority, all hard-won through wars, rivalries, and industrial genius, had been quietly transferred to foreign hands. The betrayal stung most, not because it was violent, but because it was inevitable. Brown's refusal to adapt, to temper perfection with pragmatism, had left the door open. By 1972, the sell-off was complete. David Brown retained the name, the factories, and the machines, but the lifeblood of the empire, decision-making power, had been siphoned away. Ferguson, the Americans, and global financiers now dictated the company's fate. The man who had once commanded armies of steel now faced the bitter reality that even the strongest machines cannot withstand the slow erosion of trust and authority. The age of war had built his fortune. The age of peace, ambition, and betrayal had dismantled it. David Brown had survived industrial revolutions, global conflict, and corporate rivalries, but the American betrayal proved one immutable truth. No empire, no matter how meticulously engineered, is safe from the cunning of those who understand money better than steel. The ghost in the fields. By the late 1970s, the David Brown factories still stood, hulking monuments of steel and ambition. Yet the lifeblood of the empire had long since drained away. The machines continued to roll off assembly lines. The tractors still bore his name. But the man himself had become a ghost, not of age, though he was no longer young, but of relevance. His empire, built through ingenuity, war, and relentless ambition, now operated in a world that no longer recognized him as master. David Brown, once a titan of industry, had become a shadow haunting his own creation. The fields he had dreamed of conquering, the very soil that had once borne the fruits of his post-war tractors, now seemed to mock him. Farmers remembered the machines fondly, but they cared little for the man behind them. The tractors, durable and dependable, plowed on, while their creator faded into obscurity. His perfectionism, once the spark that had made his machines extraordinary, now lingered only in memory, a ghostly echo of a man who had demanded brilliance in every weld, every gear, every engine. Brown walked the factory floors less and less. The employees, now overseen by managers loyal to distant financiers, treated him with polite distance. His voice, once commanding, now struggled to cut through the hum of machinery and the murmur of boardroom politics. The Huddersfield plant, a place that had once pulsed with the rhythm of innovation and national pride, had become a hollow shell. Yet in quiet moments, when the night shift hummed under flickering lights, Brown felt the pulse of his creation still. He could see the machines moving, hear the gears grinding, and in that, he found a bitter solace. The ghost in the fields was not just metaphorical. In rural England, farmers still whispered his name with reverence. They told stories of a man who had defied American imports, outbuilt the competition, and delivered machines that could endure mud, frost, and the unyielding weight of survival. His tractors had transformed the British countryside, yet the man himself remained absent from the world he had reshaped. The empire he had forged with sweat and steel had outlived his command, and in that survival, it mocked him. Meanwhile, Ferguson and his allies continued their quiet encroachment. The shadow of American money and influence stretched long over the remaining factories. Brown had once believed his meticulous control could resist the tides of commerce and betrayal. Now, the lesson was unavoidable. Even the most precise gears cannot govern the unpredictable clockwork of human ambition. He had survived wars, corporate feuds, and market upheavals, but the slow erosion of authority proved more lethal than any rival army. In his final years, Brown became a recluse of sorts, wandering his factories at dawn before the workers arrived. He observed, he calculated, he dreamed. The machines obeyed physics, tolerances, and metal. They did not question, they did not betray. Yet every hum reminded him of battles lost, of authority surrendered, of a kingdom transformed into a museum. He had once commanded life and steel. Now he commanded only memory and echo. The tractors continued their work, and the fields responded. Crops grew where once there had been famine, and villages rebuilt themselves after decades of war. David Brown's machines, silent witnesses to history, carried on the legacy of a man whose presence was more myth than reality. He had fought for control, for perfection, for a vision of Britain that blended resilience and pride. The land remembered him, even if the world had moved on. By the time David Brown passed away, the factories remained, the tractors still bore his name, and the fields continued to yield. But the man who had breathed life into the gears and engines, the blacksmith's son turned industrial king, was gone. His empire had survived, but he had not. The ghost in the fields was both literal and symbolic, a presence felt but unseen, a testament to brilliance, ambition, and the cruel inevitability of time. History would remember the machines, the tractors, the factories, and the innovations. It would rarely remember the man himself, except in whispers, in the quiet hum of engines, and in the stubborn endurance of the fields he had once sought to conquer. David Brown's legacy, forged in war, ambition, and betrayal, had become immortal. Yet the king who had built it walked among the living as a ghost.